sitting in a movie theater. We like silence. You're in your 4-hour long road trip, and a kid brings up, let's play the quiet game. Yes. Silence is a good thing, but then there are times when we don't want silence, times when we want an explanation, times when we want answers to questions that we have. Maybe you're in a place, or you found yourself in a place where you're coming to the end of one job or one career, and you're beginning a new one, and you know that this one's ending, and you're right there, and you're kind of asking God, what's next? What's next? What do you have for me next? I know it's time for me to transition here, and all you hear from God is, or maybe there's a time where, you're living in a place, and for whatever reason, you can't afford it anymore, circumstances change, you're being evicted, the lease is up, whatever, it's time for you to move. And, you got a few months until you have to be out, and that's not so bad. You're praying, you're asking God, what do you have for me next? Where do you want me to live next? Where do you want me? But then you're down to like 2 weeks, then you're down to 3 days, and you don't know. You don't know what to do, and you're not hearing anything from God. It seems like the only thing that could be harder or worse than that circumstance or situation you're in is when you cry out to God in it and you hear nothing. Silence. It seems like we've always been taught, when you talk to God, when you call God, right? He always answers, but you're feeling like it's just going to voicemail. You're kind of like, God, I didn't think you had voicemail, right? This is what we do with each other. We let it go. We scream, go to voicemail. Like, God, I thought you were always supposed to kind of pick up the phone. So how do we respond when God seems silent? That's what I want to talk about this morning. That's what I want to look at. How do we respond when God seems silent? Or even when God is silent. When he is silent, how do we respond at those times? So here's the first thing that I want to look at and say this morning is sometimes God speaks in the silence, but we don't hear him. In other words, it's not really a matter of God actually being silent. God's speaking in the silence, but we don't hear him because of the other noises, in our life. There's a story about a guy named Elijah in 1 Kings. Turn there this morning. I want to share this with you. 1 Kings chapter 19, or you could follow on the screen. Let me tell you a little bit about Elijah. Elijah was a prophet to Israel. This wasn't a good time in Israel's life. Other prophets had come before Elijah, and they had killed them all off, and they wanted Elijah dead as well. And so Elijah's not in a good place. He's running for his life. He's ready to kind of just quit and give up. He comes to a place where he's just kind of done, and the word of God comes to him and says, hey, eat this food and go on a 40-day journey. And so he does that, and Elijah comes to the Mount of God, Horeb. And that's where we'll pick up the story. 1 Kings 19, verse 9. There he came to a cave, and he lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel, they have forsaken your covenant. They've thrown down your altars. They've killed your prophets with the sword. And I only am left. And they seek my life to take it away. Look at verse 11. Listen to how Elijah hears God's voice. And he said, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake came, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire was the sound of a low whisper. Or you could also translate it a thin silence. Look at verse 13. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and he went out and he stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Sometimes God speaks in very loud, clear, demonstrative ways. Sometimes, but sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes God doesn't speak in the wind, in the earthquake, in the fire. Sometimes God speaks in this low whisper. this thin silence. And we may not hear him speaking in the silence because of other noises or sounds in our lives. I was thinking of the sounds that we have in our lives, and I want to share some of them with you this morning. The first one's the sound of just the busyness of life, right? We're going from one place to the next. We're kind of rushing around in traffic. We've got things to do and people to see and things to have. And life is busy, and that creates a lot of noise. Or maybe you've got a big family, right? We've got a family life. You've got kids in the house, and I've got six kids in my house. And let me tell you something, it's a lot louder than this, okay? But there's kids, and they're making their noise and doing their thing. We have various relationships, and those relationships bring stress sometimes. We yell, we argue, we fight, in those relationships. And we have those sounds and noises in our life. And of course, we all want to have fun and have entertainment at times. And so there's the good noises. Yeah. It's my favorite one. Okay, good, yeah, turn that off. I'll lose him, I'll never get him back. Okay, yeah. Get him off the stage, keep it going. And then we just have, the noises of the busyness of work. Or of school maybe, and we're just that phone, it never stops ringing, and that cement truck is back. Maybe some of you are cement truck drivers. Okay, so here's the thing, any of these sounds in our lives, in and of themselves can be noisy and a distraction, but sometimes we all know that all those sounds are happening at the same time, right? I want to share one of my favorite passages with you this morning. Father through him. Such a good passage, isn't it? I love that passage. It's just so encouraging and edifying. And here, get this. Maybe God's not as silent as we think he is. Maybe the noises in our lives are louder than we realize they are. And we have a hard time hearing God when he speaks to us in this whisper. A couple years ago or so, I decided that I wanted to get away from some of the noises and distractions in my life like we're talking about. And so I decided once a week, I try to do it every week. It hasn't happened every week. I go on what I call a spiritual retreat. I go somewhere for an hour or two, and I'm alone in this place. I'm not going to tell you where it is because I don't want any of you great people showing up and crashing my party. And I go there, and it's just time I just spend with God, and I listen. I don't bring much with me, a Bible, and I pray, and I have a journal, and this is the time that I always journal and I write because I'm horrible at journaling. I've never been good at it. I've always had people say, hey, that's a great thing, and you should do that, and so this is the time when I make a point of doing that, and sometimes when I even look back and read, I hear from God. It's a good thing. Maybe we need to think through how do we get away from these distractions in our lives. The Desert Fathers, maybe you've heard of them. They were the originators of this, I guess you could say. The Desert Fathers were early Christians around the 3rd, 4th century, and they would go out into the deserts of Egypt. And they would go out there for the purpose of removing themselves from society, from civilization, from all the noises, all the distractions, and they would just go out into the desert and fill their time mainly with things like prayer and meditation and solitude. A lot of monks and nuns and monasteries, they all came out of this time or originated there. They understood They understood that to hear from God sometimes meant getting away from distractions. And it's said about them, you can read that many of them would go days, weeks, even months without speaking a word. Not for me to do, but good for them. Let me share real quick a few other things that they teach us about practicing silence. These desert fathers. Not only do they hear God because they get away from these distractions, but here's a few other things that when we practice silence, some other benefits that come of it that we learn from these desert fathers real quick. It's just kind of a bonus this morning. Number one is silence keeps us from saying what we shouldn't say. We've all done this. We've all been there. We say things and we think, man, I wish I could take that back. Well, practicing silence helps with this. James talks about it and says, our words cause us to stumble. In Psalms 39:1, it actually says, you can look it up on your own, it actually says, put a muzzle on your mouth. Put a muzzle, take it off your dog, and go ahead and put that on yourself. Here's the second thing that practicing silence does for us. Why it's a good thing. Silence protects what God is still working on inside of us. God is doing something in us. He's at work. And sometimes when we talk too much or too soon, have too many words about that, even those things can become an interruption or a distraction to what God is wanting to teach us and how he's wanting to shape us and form us. The Desert Fathers said this: the mouth is not a door for evil to enter. The eyes are such doors. Our ears are such doors, but the mouth is only an exit door. So in other words, close up that big hole on your face a little bit more often and protect what God is doing in you. Here's the third one. Silence is the place where fruitful words come from. I love this. We've all experienced this, I mean, how many of you, if you could choose, would you pick the person that when you go to them and you kind of sit with them, they just run their mouth a lot, kind of nonstop-ish, lots and lots of words, most of which aren't very helpful or necessary? Or this person where when you go to them and you kind of talk with them, they listen really well, they sit silently, they practice silence really well. And then when they do speak, it's a handful of words, but those words, they're very well chosen, they're powerful, they're fruitful words. And I think most of us, maybe all would say, yeah, I pick the latter. Silence is where fruitful words are born, where they come from. So, practicing silence, it's a good thing for us to do because sometimes God is speaking in the silence, but we don't hear him with all the other noises. And for us to hear that whisper, that thin silence, we need to become people that practice silence ourselves. But sometimes God just goes silent, right? Sometimes God is quiet and he doesn't say anything. And the good news is that the Bible is full of silent stories. Do you know that between the Old Testament and the New Testament, okay, the end of Matthew the end of Malachi and before Matthew, there's 400 years of God being silent. That's how much time is in between here where nobody heard a thing from God. Silence. At the very center of Christianity, of course, is the cross, right? When Jesus went to the cross, Friday was a horrible day, right? Friday was a day of tragedy. Friday was a day when Jesus, he was betrayed, he's arrested, he's on trial, he's nailed to a cross, he bears our thorns, he bleeds for us, he cries out, God, why have you forsaken me? And he dies, and he's buried in a tomb. Friday is a horrible day. It's a day of the pit that we talked about last week. Sunday is a wonderful, beautiful, glorious day. Sunday is resurrection day. Sunday is triumph day. It's a good day. Saturday's a day of silence. Not much happens on Saturday. Silent. God goes silent. We ask, we cry out, we have questions, but we hear nothing. Saturday is the day after you lift up your prayers to God, but before he answers them. That's the silence. The silence is the time that comes right after he or she packs up and says, I'm leaving you and moving out. And then you're left in this place of silence, right? Silence is the time that comes after using all the cards in your pocket, but they all get declined and rejected because everything's maxed out and there's nothing more to draw from. Silence is the morning after you wake up when you've been let go from your job and now you're thinking, now what? And you ask, but you don't hear anything. Silence is the day after, the time after your dream dying. Silence is the time when you're sitting in your car pondering the words that you just heard moments earlier from the doctor that said, I'm sorry, there's just nothing more we can do. And silence. And it's not that you don't want answers, you want them desperately bad, but God seems silent. In the silence, we begin thinking this: hope is gone, rescue is never coming, and this failure is final. It's a hard place to be in. It's a horrible place to be in. It's a lonely place to be in. Silence. Job is a story of silence. If you're familiar with the story of Job, it's a story of silence. Job has 42 chapters in it, and God doesn't say a word until chapter 38. It's a story of silence. Job is a story about a guy that was stripped of everything and cried out to God and sat hearing nothing. Turn over to Job chapter 1. If you have a Bible with you, I want you to see some of this with me, or you can look up on the screen. Job chapter 1, because one of the very first things that I want us to see about Job is that Job is a good guy. Job is a good guy. In fact, maybe we can even say Job is a great guy. What happens at the beginning of Job, Satan comes before the Lord and they have this conversation. And in verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Who does Job serve? God. Job serves God. Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? Job is a good guy. Job serves God. Job's blameless. Job's righteous. Job's upright. Job fears God. Job's a good guy. He's a great guy. But Job loses everything. He's stripped of everything. He was married, he had kids, he was wealthy, he had lots of land, lots of cattle, and Job loses all of it, including his health. All he's left with is literally the breath in his lungs to keep himself alive. And Job wants to know things. Job has questions, as you and I would in a situation like that. Job wants to know, why is this happening to me? Why am I suffering? God, where is your justice? You know, there are times when silence is not what we want. We want answers, right? Kind of like when one of my kids comes home and I get the automatic email from the school that says, yeah, this child is missing these 3 assignments and failed at these 2 assignments. And then when my child comes home and I sit my child down and I say, hey, let me share this with you. Just got this email. You're missing these 3 assignments. You're failing these 2 assignments. Why is that? And when he looks at me and is just silent, nope, that's not going to work. Now's the time. I want answers. I want answers. You want answers. And Job wants answers. Look at what he says in Job 23, verse 8 and 9, though. He wants answers, but look what happens. Behold, I go forward, but he is not there. And backwards, but I do not perceive him. On the left hand, when he is working, I do not behold him. He turns to the right hand, but I do not see him. It's a moment when he's like, God, where are you? And look at Job 30, verse 20. I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. In Job 30, verses 26 and 27, this is part of what Job wants to know. But when I hoped for good, evil came. And when I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. Job is basically saying, God, why am I suffering? God, where is your justice? He had 3 friends that came to him, and their advice was, well, Job, we think it's because you've got sin in your life, and if you stop sinning, this will all change, and if you continue sinning, you'll probably die. Job is saying, but I'm a good guy. So, God, why am I suffering? Where is your justice? I want answers. And God is silent, and Job just sits on Saturday, day after day, week after week. Sometimes, here's what I want to say this morning. Sometimes God is silent because the answer isn't for us to know. And that's not something we maybe necessarily want to hear this morning. That's kind of a hard pill for all of us to swallow, I think. But sometimes, I believe, sometimes God is silent because the answer that we want, the answer that we're maybe even demanding, isn't for us to know. It's not for us to have. I told you that God stayed quiet until chapter 38. So let's go to chapter 38 and see what God says. Job 38, when God does speak to him, in Job 38, verse 2, here's God's beginning of his reply, the beginning of his response to Job's questions of, why am I suffering and where is your justice? And God says, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Oh, wow. That's not the answer I was looking for, God. Think about this. Job's a good guy. Job's righteous. He's upright. He's blameless. He fears God. Job's a servant of God. And the best he can do, the best that this guy, this great guy can do, the best he could do is speak words without knowledge. The best he can do, a Job with wisdom that he has in his own right, the best he could do is cast a shadow over God's counsel. Remember it said, you darken my counsel. All of your words, they're without wisdom. They're foolish. All you're doing to my counsel, to my wisdom, is you're just throwing a shadow over. In other words, Job, you don't see clearly who I am or what I'm doing. In the NIV, it says that he obscures God's plans. In other words, you don't understand. You don't perceive. You couldn't possibly do so. God goes on in the next few chapters to say, Job, where were you when I created the stars in the sky? Job, where were you when I measured the expanse of the heavens? When I put the grains of sand on the shores? When I filled the waters on earth with every living thing? Job, where were you? Where were you? You're nowhere to be found. Sometimes the answer, it's not for us to know. God is saying to Job, look, this is hidden from you. It's hidden from you. What you're asking, what you want to know, it's hidden. I was thinking about that because we are discovering new things all the time, aren't we? I mean, it seems like we're always learning new things, discovering new things about the planet, about the solar system, the galaxy, the universe. We're discovering new things about the human brain and body. Every time we turn on the TV, you hear some new study like, hey, now good news, coffee's good for you. We just figured it out. Great, I already knew that, but okay, cool. We're discovering new things all the time. And here's the point. If we are discovering new things all the time, that means there is much hidden from us, right? And all of these discoveries that we have that we're still uncovering all the time, which means there's a much hidden from us, that's all in the natural world. So imagine what it would be like in the supernatural world. Job, sometimes the answers, they're not for us to know. They're hidden from us, get this, they're hidden from us in the infinite wisdom and divine plan of God. It's not for you to know. It's not for me to know. It's hidden in that place. Could you imagine if God would have said, okay, Job, all right, you win. I'll answer your questions, why you're suffering, and how this could happen, and where my justice plays into this. Okay, go ahead and have a seat, Job. Well, here's how it started. Satan came to me one day, and we started having a conversation. And Satan was saying, I was roaming the earth looking for someone to destroy. And Job's just like, what's time out. You're having a conversation with Satan? Like, I thought you guys were on opposite teams. I thought like you're the good guy, he's the bad guy. I thought you're oil, water, you like go. But you're just hanging out, talking. Just, do you do this often? Is this like, I'm already confused. You haven't begun to answer my questions, and I'm already struggling. Get this. I'm already struggling to understand what's happening here, and you haven't even gotten to my questions. And what do you think is going to happen next when God says, oh, and by the way, Satan didn't really find you. I kind of suggested you. It's just, this is not going to work. You're not going to understand. But here's the thing, get this. There's something that God is doing in the silence. There's something that God is doing in the silence. When we sit on Saturday and we don't hear from God, and maybe it's because the answer's not for us to know. Maybe it's because it is hidden in the wisdom and plans and purposes of God. God is still doing something in the silence. He's not just saying, hey, tough luck. Hey, I don't care about you. He's saying on Saturday, in the silence, will you still cling to me? Will you still cling to me? There is a reason why God never answers Job's questions. And if you read the rest of the book, by the way, you see God never tells him, this is why you suffered this way. This is how my justice still works. He never answered it. And there's a reason for it. And it's not because suffering isn't important or justice doesn't matter. They do. It's because those aren't the primary point of the whole thing. The bigger thing here, the primary thing is, Job, my relationship with you. Wherever you are this morning, whatever your Saturday looks like right now, whatever silence you're in, there's the issues that you're facing and the struggles and the hardships, but the silence, it's all around this. What frames your silence is your relationship with God. And will I cling to him? Or like Job's wife, will we curse him? One of those responses damages our relationship with God. And one of them deepens it. It goes further than we could ever imagine. Silence is space, I believe, that God uses to deepen our relationship with him. He cares more about, will you trust me when you're not getting the answer that you want to have? Let me close this by just sharing Job's final response in chapter 42. Job gets it, and we see it in verse, but I want us to see how his relationship deepens with God. He says, then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear and I will speak. I will question you, and you make it known to me. And here's the key verse. I had heard of you by the hearing of my ear, but now my eyes see you. Therefore I despise myself and I repent in dust and ashes. Job says, before, God, my eyes had seen of you. I mean, I knew you and our relationship was there, it was good. But now my eyes see you. God uses the silence to deepen our relationship with him. And wherever you are this morning, whatever that time of silence may be, will you see this as a time to cling to God, to trust him, even though you're not hearing anything?